Well, impact fees are specifically here on a local basis, but they are taking their lead from the direction and the philosophy on certain issues. And probably the biggest issue is environmental and ecology impact, and from the Department of Ecology. So when they have a philosophy that says, hey, you must do this or this must be done, then the local community, which is whether it be the city, their impact fees and so forth, or whether development fees when you're doing a plan, or whether it be the county, they take their lead from that because they have to fulfill that rule or that law. So much of it is driven by that. But philosophically, here's my what I view. I am concerned about any department, whether it's state, county, or city, that primarily is telling those department heads, look, you need to justify who you are and fund yourself. They become thusly a revenue-generating department. I understand the frustration that the councils and the commissioners have, or I would have up there, where you want to see, hey, where's the balance of user fees? That is, those people who use the services, who are impacting that local area, they need to be responsible for that. But then it gets out of balance, where the motivation, thusly, then, of the departments, or there's been abdication of leadership by the legislature or whatever, saying, hey, you department heads, you got to justify, you got to make your budget work, you got to create your own revenue source. They become less focused on serving the people, which is what government's supposed to be, is serving the people, and now they become a revenue-generating entity. We do that in private enterprise. We shouldn't be doing that in public enterprise. The public services of government should be focused on serving the people. And so we have to look at how we're trying to motivate, or how we're putting the pressure or the onus on those department heads. And they often are doing it because they're getting the leadership, the guide from above. Also, when I was talking about I guess the paradigm shift, we saw here, I think it was 2 sessions ago, it was either 2009 or 2010, where the Gregoire was pushing for a climate change and a philosophy of all these rules and regulations that were going to be implemented, and it was not passed by both parties, okay? It was not a partisan. They both agreed, no, this is the wrong time, we're not going to do it. Well, Gregoire said, fine, I'm just going to do it through rulemaking. And what we end up having is we have new rules, or we have these regulatory czars, particularly in the Department of Ecology. It's interesting, that department alone is the only department that's had growth in the last 2 years. There's 43 rulemakers that are hired, getting paid somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000 with benefits apiece. 43. Now, here's the most recent that just came down the pike that I just heard from the BIA. That is the Building Industry Association. But not only are they frustrated, but the Clark County, they're frustrated because this new rule is that all new streets, all new driveways, every new development must have permeable, water-permeable concrete surfaces. That's about 3 times the normal cost, and it's a great idea. The water permeates down into the soil, and thus we avoid some of the stormwater runoff and so forth. But it just doesn't make fiscal sense. The idea is we want to have low impact developments. That is low impact on our environment. But we're having high impact on our families. We're having a high impact on people able to work. And that's what happens with Chuck's Produce. That this philosophy that's being pressured down on the counties and so forth comes from the state. We do not have leadership. We do not have leadership at the state level, whether it's from the governor or from the legislature, that is saying no to these regulations. One of the things that was put forward by in the last session, this last session in 2011, was a moratorium on all new rules. A moratorium. Let's just hold off. You know, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and suddenly have a very dangerous place for people to live and work and so forth. We want a healthy environment. But let's hold off on the rules right now. Let's hold off. Let's just get ourselves in order and start getting people back to work. If we get people back to work, we're going to have the things we want. So that's my philosophy when it comes to these impact fees. We need to serve the people, number one. That's what the government's there for. Okay, now realize again, I'm running for, as Craig Riley, I don't think we announced that, I am running for the state legislature. I'm not running for a city position nor for a county position. But that does have a significant impact. Just like rules and regulations affect development, construction, healthcare, and so forth, the unfunded mandates that are all good ideas that come down from above. These are mandates for doing this, doing that. They might be funded what? And this is, I'm not going to blame the feds at this point, because it's happened over years and years from the legislature. We want the police department to do this. We want you to monitor these criminals this way. We want the pedophiles to be identified and so forth. Well, yes, I do too. I mean, I was just a few blocks from my house up on the Heights. That's where Wesley Allen Dodd killed those two boys. You bet I'm concerned about it, okay? But however, when we mandate something from above, we better make sure that there's not only current funding, but ongoing funding. And if there's not, then we need to pull back those mandates. We cannot demand that the city, that the fire departments, or whatever it might be, must do these type of things because of some great idea that we had in the past. So money must flow with that. It does put pressure on local communities to have to find out where they're going to come up with those resources. If you talk to Sheriff Lucas, if you talk to the fire department, they all say that's their greatest frustration, unfunded mandates coming down from the state. I haven't been involved in that research, that study, even that report, and I think what we have is the cart before the horse. Why is CTRAN prepping and preparing and doing all of this? I love the concept of rapid transit buses. I mean, that is flexible, it's a great way to move people, it's fast, it's efficient, and so forth. Now, whether they should take a lane away or and so forth, I don't know. But if we're doing it primarily under the premise that we're going to have light rail in here, that's the problem. We should be doing it because it's going to move people to and from wherever they need to go here in our Clark County. We need to be focused on Clark County, not trying to satisfy the needs of Sam Adams, the needs of Oregon, wanting their motivation to get light rail up here because of their own federal funding process. That should not be our motivation. So I'd say to CTRAN, if your only premise of doing this is because you want to satisfy the potential for light rail that might come in, and that still hasn't been decided yet. Yes, they've agreed on this bridge. We're getting kind of into the bridge area here, but there's a real question of the affordability of this bridge. And I will say right now, I use light rail. I've used it when I lived over in London. I use it when I go down to the Timbers, but it's a fluff. It's an extra. All right? We can move far more people, far faster, far more efficiently, and be far more flexible in our design of where we move people when we use rapid transit bus going down to Portland or whether it's in our own county, all right? Now, in the future sometime when we have higher density, and that will happen in the future, and we need to be looking in the future, perhaps light rail might work. But right now, at this time, if the premise of doing this rapid transit up and down the fourth plane corridor is primarily to satisfy our need for the light rail component of the bridge, then I say that's the wrong premise. What I think the problem is here is, again, we've had this kind of infiltration of this green philosophy. I moved up here years ago. I went to Lewis and Clark College, okay? That's what I went to Lewis and Clark College, and I love the Northwest. And I've been here ever since, 40 years, most of my life. I love living here. My kids love living here. Why? Because it's a beautiful place. It's green. You go down to the desert or whatever. Just came back from a visit down to Arizona, and it's, I love it here. In fact, I lived over in Bend for a period of time, but I love the valley, what we have in the Willamette Valley here and in Vancouver. So that's why we've been living here for 25 years and raised my kids here. So I'm all for conservation. I'm all for protecting our environment. But when that becomes a sole priority and starts infiltrating every aspect of how we're making our decisions, then we have a problem. Because now we don't have a balanced approach. It doesn't make fiscal sense to be doing this. And we're always saying, well, we're justifying because of possibility of the future. Well, somehow I don't think that every single thing that we're deciding, for example, I gave the example of this permeable streets that we need to have, concrete, and the cost of them, replacement cost alone. The cost for installing it, and then the replacement cost every 5 to 8 years. Plus you have to use chlorine bleach to get the moss out and so forth, and vacuum systems and hiring people. It just doesn't make sense. And there are other alternatives for doing this. For example, you can have what they're called water gardens. This is the medians that go up and down, let's say 4th plane or middle plane or whatever. What happens is that you dig these out, the water flows down into them. They have a deeper than normal. They have rock and different layers, and the water flows into that, and thusly it permeates down through the filtering down into our groundwater. So when we make our sole decision based upon this green philosophy, and it doesn't make fiscal sense, then we have a problem. We see this also with the proposal by the Democrats of putting forth this last year. It did not pass, but what they wanted to see was that we were voting for in this last election is $500 million to go to retrofitting the schools so that they'd be more green, as if the current supervisors, plant supervisors in every single one of these school districts isn't already looking to how we can have better lighting, we can have automatic switches, we can control our heating. They've already done all this. And when you look at those facilities, and they've done a study, Evergreen Freedom and also the Washington Policy Center, they did this study. They looked at the schools that were actually built or retrofitted prior to this policy, and they found that they were no more efficient. In fact, they actually cost more. Totally apart from the construction, but they actually cost more to run from an energy standpoint than beforehand. So I think sometimes all that's green is not golden, and we need to remember that. This is not the time for light rail. Light rail may be appropriate when we have the density. Every single study shows light rail is not appropriate with the density of population that we have right now. Okay, the feds are funding some $800 million into this project, okay? And the $800 million is only going to service about 7% of the people that are going across that bridge. So that's 30% of the cost of the total bridge construction, and it's only serving 7%. I'm a pragmatist. We need a bridge, okay? Now, some people may argue that one way or another, but I've talked to the bridge contractors that actually go in there and fix the bridge. Remember about 10 or 15 years ago, we had a large barge that hit one of those bridges. They say the steel is brittle and does need to be replaced, okay? And we do have a congestion problem. We have problems that have to do with transportation and safety. We do not have a problem with light rail, okay? Light rail is not the issue. If that's an extra thing that they want to build this for, then let's phase it in. You can easily have with that double pancake, as they're talking about it, have it there for the potential to add in the future. I have nothing wrong, there's nothing wrong. But let's use that $800 million to do what it's supposed to do, which is build a safe and affordable bridge for Clark County residents. The residents here are going to, it's 2/3 or 3/4 of the people that are going across that bridge are going to be financing it through tolls. And they should not have to be paying for a bridge that the feds should be responsible for. This is an international bridge. It services everything from Canada up to, from Canada down to California. So the feds have bailed on us. They have tied their funding solely to this light rail, and it's nice. Light rail is nice, but is it essential during these times, these financially difficult times where people don't have jobs? And people say, oh, I've heard this kind of off-the-cuff answer, oh, so they're $5.50 or more round trip, which is what the environmental impact statement says. Oh, and it's kind of interesting. After 10 years of studies, they come out with $5.50 or $5.40. That's round trip. And then the treasurer of Oregon comes out 2 days later and says, your numbers are wrong. And I read that and I went, oh my goodness, what is it going to be? 10% off, 15% off? No, it was 100% off. They need to double that, double it in order to pay the bonds. Something's definitely wrong with this. And if you talk to the bridge contractors, I had a chance to talk to a bridge contractor just the other day who actually was involved with repairing, has been involved in bidding on this bridge and so forth. He says that they could actually build that bridge today for $1.9 billion. Well, where's all the money going? Where's it coming? What's going on? He says there's so many little political hands that are inside this pot of gold, just grabbing out their little bit of money for their little department, you know, for fish and game, for natural resources, for Fort Vancouver Historical Society. 17 million right there, check, going to be cut. That's what I heard. Okay? Or how about this? And I don't know if this is still part of the plan, but Sam Adams does not want to hear pile drivers in the middle of the river. Okay? When you don't hear pile drivers, how are you going to put in pilings? Well, you have to build a cofferdam, a dam around that piling. Then you got to excavate the old, and then you got to dig down with whatever equipment and so forth, and men going down inside that hole, digging it out, and then building it from the, you know, from the bedrock up. While a pile driver is quite simple. You simply have that barge and you're driving pilings down. Well, that's noisy for about 9 months, I guess. I'm not sure. I have to check with the engineer, but over a period of time. And well, if you don't have that noise, what is the cost to do these cofferdams? $500 million. 15% approximately of the entire project, just so we don't hear. Now, when you and I build a house, we accept the fact that there's going to be noise there. It's just going to be noisy. When we do a remodel, it's going to be noisy, it's going to be dusty. That's the way it is. Well, when we build a bridge, it's going to be noisy. It's going to be dusty. It's going to be difficult. We're going to have congestion and so forth. But that's just part of the process. So I do have a problem with the way this thing's being funded. I see that the feds have bailed on us, that we don't have a voice. We don't have a local voice that's standing up and speaking strongly and saying, listen, we need to look at this. We need to look at the details. We need, up to the very last moment that you or I buy a house or buy a car, we're looking at everything. Am I getting the right interest rate? Am I getting what I want? Is this what I want? There's nothing wrong with us looking at this once again, saying, are we doing the right thing? We need to build a bridge, but we don't need to build a monument. Well, we kind of have two things there. First, kind of, you know, the bridge situation. You know, do we need more bridges? Well, I would say yes. Now, I'm not an engineer, and I haven't seen all the different proposals that were put out over the last 10 years, but just consider this. This north-south thoroughfare that we have between two states and between 3 different nations, that the entire western United States benefits from what goes on with our transportation issues here, the bridge that we have, or bridges. Now, and yet, we only have 2. I was just talking to Ed Gorcutt. He said that they have 5 bridges going over the Cowlitz and only services a 100,000 population. We have 2 bridges. We have almost 500,000 here in Clark County, and we have 1.2 to 2 million in Portland. There's inequity there. Or how about this? Going across the Willamette, there's 8 bridges. It's called Bridge City. And why don't we, with as critical area as we have for transportation issues, for commerce, have more than just 2 bridges? So that's it. Now, where they build the bridge there, or they build another bridge in the industrial area down in Fruit Valley and going over to the north side of Portland, I don't know. You know, that's for a lot of planners to get into. But I do think that we ought to consider that we need to really have that as part of our goals, having more bridges going across the Columbia. Now, it's going to affect sprawl, whether it's industrial sprawl or residential sprawl or whatever. That's growth. I mean, part of the growth of our county here has been, and part of the fact that we have such high unemployment, is you don't hear people slamming nails anymore. There's not people working. It's far different than if you're in a technology zone, let's say up in the Sound area. We have tremendous high unemployment because our people are not working, they're not building houses. And then it gets to, well, how do we develop? Where do we develop? Yes, we should have a balanced approach, but how about this? It's interesting again. We want to have, let's say, for example, higher density. And we do kind of have this hodgepodge thing here in Vancouver where you can drive through neighborhoods and all of a sudden there is a 1 acre lot that's open and not been developed. And you could have some more townhomes or something like that. So the idea is let's consolidate our growth a little bit more, higher density. But then they come out with new rules, like for example, water runoff rules from the Department of Ecology that says that when you develop a piece of property, that you can't allow any more water that runs off that piece of property that happened in primeval times. That is before Lewis and Clark was here. The water quality and the water quantity cannot be any higher. New rules, new regulations again. So you can't even, your hands are tied. You can't have infill projects that help develop and control growth, which is, we want to preserve the beauty of our Northwest. But how do you do that when you have these rules that says if you do that, you have to have holding ponds? Well, when a developer goes in and says, okay, I've got this 1 acre and half of it, that is 4 lots, goes towards holding pond, that jacks up the cost of the lots, and thusly you have no growth at all where you want to have growth. So we have this disconnect between regulatory agencies and the philosophy of how we want to manage growth here, not only in our own county, but statewide. And that's where we need to address it in Olympia. And that's why you need to have legislators that have a balanced approach, a pragmatic approach. That doesn't want, I don't want to do anything other than get people back to work. And the only way we can do that is by controlling these regulatory rules that are just oppressing businesses so that people cannot hire individuals and give them a good wage and provide them with good benefits. And that's what it comes down to. Well, I've heard some different thoughts and ideas going forward. There's one called, if I get the phrase right, increment taxing on future revenues. Somehow that sounds like a big credit card to me. I think we need to be fiscally responsible. We have to work with the restrictions. Yes, that's where impact fees come in, and we talk about Chuck's. But Chuck's has hired his own team of people to talk about the impact fees, and it needs to be a balanced approach because when he did his own study with his own professionals, he came out with far less, and I can't quote the number was, 175,000 or whatever it was, anyway, and I may be totally off on that. But yes, impact fees, where those who use it, those who benefit from it, there should be a balance of paying for it. The city and the state has to look at how they're going to be funding these projects. We have a lack of dollars or revenues going into the state coffers, which is part of the problem. Why? Well, we have an economy that's collapsed, so people aren't working, they're not going out as much. They're not traveling when they could because they don't have the money in the family bank to do that. We have businesses that are not working, they pull back on the number of their rigs on the road. And then one of the things is that we have greater efficiency and on the hybrid cars and so forth. So it's from a gas tax. One of the things we may have to look at is going to a mileage tax. I mean, we are transitioning. We may not like that. I may not like it. Those people drive a lot of miles. But the reality is we're transitioning away, thank goodness, away from a lot of the fuels, the carbon fuels, and going to hybrids. Well, if that's the way we're going, we still have the need to raise revenues because those people are benefiting. It's a use tax. Even though you're driving a hybrid car, you're still driving on the roads, and those roads need to be maintained because you're going to be complaining as much as anybody about those holes in the road, the rocks flying up, and so forth. So we're going to have to transition and create a little bit different type of revenue source or funding for the state. Okay. I thank you for having me here. Again, for those who didn't see this, my name is Craig Riley. I've lived here for 25 years and in the Northwest for 40 years. A little bit about my background, which you didn't have a chance to ask me, is that I have had all my life in healthcare. So I provide, my father was a doctor, and I got a degree in healthcare administration, owned and operated a chain of nursing facilities with over 600 employees, so I know how to handle large budgets. I know how to delegate, which is an important issue to deal with, because when you're in the legislature, you need to trust each of the department heads. But I also know how to expect good reporting and accountability. And that's one of the things, if you talk to Brian Sontag, who is our state auditor, that we have a real lack of accountability in all the departments. And some are worse than others. And that's where we can really save quite a bit of money in having greater accountability, fiscal accountability. So my heart has been in healthcare all my life. I ran and operated a home health agency, ambulance company, physical rehab programs, and so forth. Then I sold those off, and by the way, I know what it's like to lose everything, because when I sold those off and moved over here from the Bend area, we lost pretty much everything. If anyone's ever gone through a transition in their life, they know what it's like. You start a new business up, things don't work out, and it was during the '87 crash, and we were it's all gone. All those savings, all retirement, so I had to build everything up from scratch, and I know what it's like. Those were hard times. People who have gone through them back then can remember. And so I took what I knew and knowledge, and I started working in the employee benefits area. So I work with benefit packages, benefits for mostly small businesses of about 50 employees and less. But I know what it's like. I know what the people have been wrestling with. I know what employers have been wrestling with, trying to fund these benefit packages, trying to do something good for their employees. And I also see the difference between the benefit package that the average employee has and how much they have to pay for it versus what state employees do. All right? There's a big differential there. In fact, here's just one that we could save some money. Do you know that most employers have dropped their dental of 50 employees or less? They can't afford the dental anymore. They feel that, they said, hey, if I have a priority where I'm going to put my money to help Joe and Jane, who works for me and keeps my business alive, I'm going to put my money into healthcare. Not that the dental isn't important. I mean, we all feel it is. But they had to make priorities. Or they said, we'll make a dental plan available, but we're not going to fund it as much. It's going to be a voluntary plan. So we don't fund 100% of that. We only fund a very minimal amount. Well, that's not true with the state employees. The dental plan there is funded 100%. If you take that almost 165,000 employees and you took $50, which is the average cost for a dental plan, and you started multiplying that out, that's a lot of money that would be saved for the state coffers. But healthcare is what is my passion. And I have a real concern as we go forward, and just a real quick note on this, is that we have health reform. Whether it's stopped or not, that's Rob McKenna's affair. He's been working on that. But if it goes forward the way it is right now, you can read any article anywhere, and they're going to say more than 50% of those uninsured are going to be going on to Medicaid. Medicaid's funded by Medicare and state dollars. It's called, not Medicare, but by the feds and by the state, and that's called Medicaid. So it's a 50-50 share. Once they're on, and we have that new influx of individuals, all right, where do they go? Well, they now have insurance, so they can just call up a doctor and go see a doctor. Not so. Anybody out there who has on Medicare or Medicaid know what it's like. You call up one of the local clinics, you're probably going to hear no. And why is a clinic saying no to these people? Because Medicaid only pays them, compared to me and my private insurance, about 20 cents on the dollar. Medicare only pays them about 40 cents on the dollar. So they're saying no to it. So what we've done is that all these people, the uninsured, have gotten on to Medicaid, but they have no place to go. So what are they going to do? No different than they did before. When they have an emergency, or they even just have a small chronic problem, you know, a sick child with whooping cough or whatever it is, or whatever, they're going to go to the emergency room, the most expensive type of service we could probably have. Where should they be going? They should be going to a doctor. So health reform has, and that we're going to have to implement it here in this state, has not solved our problem. We still have a demand, I believe, as a compassionate citizen of our state, of our county, and of our city, that we have a responsibility of creating access. And the number one way we can do that with very little investment is creating more public health clinics, so people with lower income have a place to go. That's what we need to do. So whether it's healthcare, or whether it's the bridge, or whether it's infrastructure, I mean, just building our roads and so forth, I'm a pragmatic individual. I care about how things are done. I want a quality of life for us here in Vancouver, in Clark County, but I believe that we can do that by being fiscally responsible. One doesn't negate the other. We can be fiscally responsible and yet create a wonderful future for ourselves. So that's why I'm running, and I ask for the people's vote here this November. Thanks.